Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. I'm Mary Cox and I'm the president of the IOP Student Advisory Committee. Tonight you will hear from some of America's best current and former mayors who are here this week for the IOP's newly elected mayors conference. Before you meet our speakers, let me first introduce our moderator, IOP Director Bill Purcell. Born and raised in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Director Purcell attended Hamilton College before leaving the Northeast to attend Vanderbilt Law School in Nashville, Tennessee. Upon receiving his JD, he remained in Tennessee and served as a public defender before being elected to the Tennessee House of Representatives. He served in the legislature for 10 years, including 6 years as that body's majority leader. It was about this time, 10 years ago in 1999, that Bill first came to the Institute of Politics as the newly elected mayor of Nashville. During his tenure as mayor, Nashville saw vast improvements, including massive economic expansion and major investment in public schools. After 2 terms in office, Mayor Purcell came to the IOP in the fall of 2007 as a resident fellow. He captivated and charmed us and convinced us all of the importance of America's mayors and America's cities. Last fall, we were lucky enough to bring him back, this time as the director of the Institute. Please join me in welcoming Bill Purcell and our mayors.
Well, first of all, let me thank Mary for that very kind and complete introduction, and as well for her leadership among many students who are so critical to the operation of this institute. The focus of this memorial to President Kennedy has always been the students of Harvard College, the students of this Kennedy School of Government, this university. And they've been a large part of the governance as well as a large part of the inspiration from our founding in our earliest days. I'm pleased and delighted to be a part of and moderating this really outstanding panel of America's mayors here tonight. These are the 3 mayors that you would want not only to be involved in the leadership of an organization of mayors, but frankly to talk to you about American cities at a crossroads at this time in our history. To know each of these mayors will, I hope, be something you'll want to do even more fully after this evening's panel. My brief introduction would present first Elizabeth Kaut to my left. She's the mayor of Burnsville, Minnesota. She's vice president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and will be taking the place of president of the U.S. Conference after the first of the year. She was first elected in 1994 and is currently in her 5th term as mayor. She has emphasized community development, youth involvement, responsible stewardship of natural resources, and has had a special focus on the international place of America's cities, something we'll talk about in just a moment. She has a BA in theology and a master's in psychology. She's one of the first women to serve as a professional minister within the Catholic Church. To her left is Greg Nichols. He's been the mayor of Seattle, Washington since 2002 and is the current president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. In 2006, I think many people in this room know that the EPA awarded Mayor Nichols the Climate Protection Award for his efforts, his historic efforts in supporting grassroots environmentalism and the construction of light rail as well in Seattle. This is a subject that we will also spend some more time with here during our discussion tonight. For his leadership on this particular issue, Rolling Stone magazine dubbed Mayor Nichols as the Pied Piper of mayors for climate-controlled strategies. And well, it's impressive when Rolling Stone says anything nice about you at all.
It's nice to be in Rolling Stone.
To round out our panel here tonight is Mayor Michael Nutter. He's been the mayor of Philadelphia since the year 2008. He's a lifetime Philadelphian and served as chairman of the Pennsylvania Convention Center Authority Board and on the City Council for nearly 15 years prior to his service as the mayor of the city. Philadelphia has produced actually an unusually large number of mayors in American cities. The present mayor of Las Vegas, Nevada, Oscar Goodman, the mayor of Richmond, Virginia, the mayor of Atlanta, Shirley Franklin, as well as myself, the former mayor of Nashville, all came from Philadelphia. But Mayor Nutter stayed right where he was and is now leading this city. On the council, he worked very hard to lower taxes and make the city more efficient, enact ethics reforms, passed the citywide smoking ban. He's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School of Business. As Mary indicated, this institute has been bringing together America's mayors for a long time. Since 1973, every 2 years, we have convened here the new mayors of this country, together with many of the long-standing mayors who are a part of their review of best practices, mistakes made and learned from. And as a result, I think the mayors of America have been much stronger. It's my pleasure to tell you that in your presence tonight are many of these mayors, I would say, among the very best mayors in this country. And if I might just ask them to stand and let you recognize the presence of so many of America's mayors here tonight. Please stand up, y'all. On the mind of all of these mayors, as well as the mayors and frankly everyone in this room and the people of this country, is the economy at this time in our history. It is not easy for national economists here, to assess whether we're out of, near the end of, the beginning of the end of the recession that we've all confronted. But for mayors, the issue is right in front of them. It's not an academic question at all. America's cities have been experiencing major revenue losses and high unemployment, which is likely to linger through much of 2010. And even more complicated is the way in which the revenue sources of cities, frankly, lag behind the revenue recoveries of the national government. So for Mayor Nutter first, let me ask, how are you and the city of Philadelphia managing the budget itself and the decisions that you confront, making tough choices, obviously, and engaging at the same time in policy innovation that you promised during the time that you were running to be the mayor?
Oh, how long ago that was. Mayor, thank you, and the fellow mayors, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I've been trying to get to Harvard for a long period of time, and finally got here today. It's been a quite interesting day. I, of course, started in Philadelphia this morning, traveled to Washington, D.C. to participate in a forum with the Brookings Institution and the National League of Cities. Steve Cochran from Moody's Economy.com declared this morning that at the forum that I participated in, that the recession was over. The panel that I was on, my response to him was, hearing you say the recession is over reminds me of a sign I saw a couple years back that said, "Mission accomplished." There's no way in the world that on the ground, where real people live and where we have to make decisions, and these new mayors, depending on your cycle, if you get sworn in January, unfortunately I can tell you it is not over. Where we work, where we live, where we conduct business. Unemployment has continued to rise in Philadelphia. I was in D.C. a month and a half ago. I reported that unemployment was at 10.7% in Philadelphia. 3 weeks later, we reported that it was at 11.1%. So we're still about almost a point over the national average. And even the feds believe that unemployment will go to somewhere in the 11-12% range next year. And so I already know what that means for Philadelphia. We're currently down $50 million in the current fiscal year in just our wage tax receipts. I had to close a $2.4 billion five-year plan deficit over the last year and a couple months. And it's a constant struggle just looking for stabilization. We're just trying to figure out where the bottom is, and then you can make your plans going from there. Having said all that, because I've been depressed since this morning, so I'm not going to carry that here into Harvard and Boston or Cambridge, but still good things going on. Crime continues to go down. Great police commissioner, Charles Ramsey, since I've been in office for almost 2 years now, homicides are down 25% as compared to 2007, shortly after I came into office. Greenworks Philadelphia, our plan to be the #1 green city in the United States of America, is moving along. Recycling rates are up. Citizens are excited about the opportunity to have a more sustainable and greener Philadelphia. Educational attainment continues to be on the rise through our school system. Even though I'm not in charge of it, we have a great partnership with our schools. But the economy is a major challenge. Unemployment, as I mentioned earlier, continues to rise, and people are trying to figure out, and I'll kind of close with this. We can make an announcement almost every day, and we're very excited about economic recovery dollars, ARRA, but you could make an announcement about economic recovery dollars in the morning and make an announcement about cutting services in the afternoon of the same day. And the citizens do not understand what is going on and how that is possible. The unfortunate reality, of course, is that for cities, not states, but cities cannot use economic recovery dollars for our budgetary challenges and problems. The citizens don't understand why the distinction, what's the difference, and what are you doing with our tax dollars. So it's tough.
We're going to come back to the economy, and then at the second portion of this forum, as we always do, there'll be an opportunity for members of the audience to ask questions. And I think you'll look forward to exploring some of these issues, but I'd like to put several issues on the table before we get to the larger set of questions. The U.S. Conference of Mayors itself was founded during the Great Depression, and the purpose at that time was to bring the issues of America's cities to America's agenda. Among the other things that have changed in those intervening years, and the leadership present here, Tom Cochran, Tom McClyman, and others know this so well, is the new place of America's cities on the world's agenda, on the way in which people in cities, the mayors in particular, see their place as part of a much larger international setting. And I was going to ask Mayor Kaut if she would comment a little on the way in which her view of the world, the view of her city and other cities, and their place in the world has changed during your time as mayor.
Thank you. A very good question. And it's always a great time when you can come to a place like Harvard to be with your fellow mayors, those who are in office and those who are newly elected, and to share best practice and to share the experiences that we have with mayors, and also to talk and to hear from the students here in Harvard. So to answer your question, we find ourselves in a recession, unlike the Great Depression. But what we see now is that mayors and cities see themselves not only locally, but regionally competing on a global stage. What we also know that mayors are talking to mayors in Germany, mayors in Europe and China, and looking at the economy from a much larger perspective than a more parochial perspective. In my city, our Fortune 500 companies are international companies. One of our largest is Goodrich, which is in aerospace. Now, they have great contracts here in our country from companies like Boeing, Defense, and NASA. But they also are receiving contracts from France, from Airbus. So we compete on an international platform, international stage. So as mayors, as you heard from Mayor Don Pasquale, we have to begin to nurture relationships across the world because it's all about jobs. We need to retain the jobs that we have now in our cities, grow those jobs, and attract new jobs. So it means that we are talking and helping our companies retain their positions in our city and continue to grow, but also make sure that we're attracting new companies to our city because jobs are important to our people. Jobs are important to all of the students who are sitting here. And you're here because you're interested in what's going to be the future for your livelihood. We also know that if we're going to be looking at jobs, we're also going to be looking at the infrastructure. What kind of telepresence can we have in terms of the infrastructure that's going to connect us on a larger scale? The U.S. Conference of Mayors have been truly on the forefront in looking at regional economies, but not just regional economies, but what kind of infrastructure connects us within this country, but also to the world at large. So we see ourselves in a very different position because we are now on a global stage, and we need to look larger rather than parochial.
Which moves us really to a mayor who saw that ahead of perhaps any mayor in this country. Greg Nichols, I think many people in this room know, saw the connection of cities to to the environment in which they lived and worked, but also to the larger environment of the world. And undertook an effort that I think not only do I know no other city or mayor had undertaken before, but to greater effect perhaps than had been seen in our lifetimes, if ever. Greg, why don't you talk a little bit about the way in which you saw the ability of a mayor and a city to bring the nation and ultimately so many of the world cities to focus on the issue of climate protection and perhaps other issues as well.
Hey, Bill, thank you for having us here. This is my second visit to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum, and it's a pleasure to be back. And my second visit to the new mayor's school. Unfortunately, when I was elected mayor, I didn't get to come because my election was too close to call. So I've gotten to catch up. The background for the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement is pretty simple. When I was elected mayor in 2001, it really was not an issue that was on my agenda. It was something that as a citizen I was concerned about, as we all were, but I assumed our federal government was doing something about it. And I also thought that it was something that was off in the future and going to happen someplace far away and not in my backyard. And I discovered that I was wrong on each count. In the winter of 2004, 2005 in Seattle, very dry, very warm winter, which meant that in the Cascade Mountains, the ski season was canceled, which was a tragedy for our skiers. But for me as mayor, it had repercussions as well, because we rely on that snowmelt, and we have for over a century, for clean, fresh water, not just for Seattle, but for about 1 million people around Seattle, and for green power, hydroelectric power. And so if there's no snow, there is no ability to provide that water and that electricity. And the mayor of Tacoma and I had to get on the radio and urge people to start showering together. And even in Seattle, Washington, that is a radical concept. So it became an issue for me that was here and now, and it was a local issue. And so I pledged that Seattle would do its part, that we would follow the reductions called for in the Kyoto Protocol as if the United States had signed on and ratified that treaty. But I knew that that was just a symbolic gesture, and that we are a tiny fraction of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and that it's hard to get people to change behaviors for purely symbolic reasons. So I challenged mayors across the country to join in. And a few weeks ago, we announced that the 1,000th city, Mesa, Arizona, had signed on to the Climate Protection Agreement. It now represents over 86 million Americans, and those reductions are going on in those cities, and they're real. So it is not symbolic. And so as the United States does go back to the table, we don't go back starting from ground zero. We go back with a strong foundation of 1,000 laboratories where mayors, none of whom in this room have an ego, but some do out in the other cities, try to make their mark on this, try and have an impact on this very real issue. And in addition, it sent a message internationally that there was intelligent life in America, and that we would not only rejoin the effort to deal with climate change, but we would help lead the effort eventually. And I think that that was as important an aspect as what we did nationally to energize leadership in the complete absence of the federal government taking any leadership role. So there's a role for cities to play at the grassroots level to make it safe for our states and for our Congress to take action on these very important issues. We can do it at the local level, we can talk about it face to face, neighbor to neighbor, and we can come up with answers, and then we can raise the expectation that our national and state governments will follow. And I think, Bill, that one of the lessons that I've learned from that is that that role of cities probably ought to extend in other areas as well. This should not be a one-time event or unique phenomena. But if you think about it, when this country was created and the Constitution was written, there was one city of 100,000 people in this country. And so rather than rugged urbanists, you had gentlemen farmers writing the Constitution. If they had been rugged urbanists, what other forms would it have taken? How would the Senate have looked? Rather than 2 per state, regardless of population, perhaps it would have looked very different. And as we face the challenges of the 21st century, I think we need to figure out a new relationship between our federal government and our metropolitan areas, which now represent the vast majority of the economy of this country and every other country on earth.
Go ahead,
Can I
ma'am.
just
Please.
add to that? One of the things with what we as mayors have done under the leadership of Mayor Nichols is the agreement, the Climate Protection Agreement. When I was privileged to go to Brussels during the Committee of the Regions forum to represent the mayors of the United States. And one of the things that came out of that is that because of the leadership of the mayors of this nation, the mayors of Europe have now come together to form an agreement or a covenant of mayors to even do the same thing. And they're wanting to now partner with the mayors of America because this planet is under our stewardship. All of us are responsible for it. But the other piece that came out of that, and I see it in America today, is that mayors and corporate CEOs are working together to find solutions. And you will see the green job evolution that's coming out. And I can tell you that in conversations with senior vice presidents of corporations and presidents of corporations, they are building innovation and green jobs in this arena. And one company, 25% of its new portfolio, well, it's 25 of its portfolio is in green jobs. That tells you something about what's happening in the world today. And so it is, when you look at what's happening here, it's because of the leadership of Mayor Nichols and what the U.S. Conference of Mayors have done in putting that platform out to the world at large. We're getting cooperation across the world and building new jobs, and other mayors are also signing or wanting to sign a similar agreement.
Mayor Dunner, I think Philadelphia's had particular experience with what this means at the street level in terms of the possibilities for employment going forward. What's your experience in Philadelphia with the way in which this environmental focus has translated into actual employment?
We've had some great recent successes. There's a Maxwell Education Group. I just attended about 2 weeks ago, a graduation ceremony. 24 happened to be guys, 24 guys, all of whom were unemployed, 5 ex-offenders, 6 had recently served in the military, all dislocated workers. We went through a solar panel installation training program, took about 8 weeks. All of them today are anticipating employment because jobs have already been lined up in the private sector. They're not working for me. They're out in the private sector. So the job demand is out there. The training is available. They were trained through ARRA dollars over on the workforce investment side. And I have to tell you, it was one of the most enjoyable moments the time that I've been in office to see the promise and the hope of what President Obama was trying to do, but then to see it on the ground really take place. And we've had other success stories like that. There's much more work to be done, and it's not only whether it's dislocated workers who may or may not have certain educational attainment levels. Four Seasons Hotel in Philadelphia earlier this week, which is a beautiful hotel, but I spent most of the time actually up on their roof. They just put in micro turbines. They're going to cut their energy costs by 30% in the hotel, and a variety of other actions that they're going to take. And so we take the perspective that the green economy should be able to support jobs, whether you have a GED or a PhD. There's a job in the green economy for you. And I think that the definition of what the green economy is about will continue to evolve over time. And you'll see increasingly more and more companies, more and more jobs will be considered green from a variety of fashions. But the federal government's involvement, I mean, this is, again, the discussion from earlier today and the discussion tonight, of course, is about cities. But I think within that, we always have to stay focused on the question, what is the real role of the federal government, and what is this relationship all about? And I think increasingly, we're not necessarily asking the feds to send us money, but to create opportunity, help us deal with some forces that are beyond our control. Many of us are suffering because of losses in the stock market. Our pension funds have been slashed. We have to make up those dollars out of our general fund in order to keep providing services. Federal government can actually be helpful in a variety of ways other than just directly sending a check.
Let me talk for a minute about the short term then, though, because the federal government did begin a significant amount of stimulus in the larger economy, and a portion of that was directed toward projects that were shovel-ready was one phrase, other kinds of projects that could immediately spur changes in infrastructure. What has that meant for Philadelphia, and what does it mean long-term? And then I'd like each of the other cities to talk about what this has meant for you in the near term, and then what you see going forward as these stimulus funds obviously are expended.
Try to give you a short answer, and I mean, I have no complaints about ARA, very excited about it. The president worked hard, the Congress worked hard, love to have the money. The challenge is we applied for $310 million of ARA funds. We've been awarded $157 million. We have in hand about 14. And so I have a great stack of award letters. And as we work through the process, again, not a criticism. I mean, they're trying to kick the dollars out of the agencies as quickly as possible, but there is a difference between the award and the receipt. We like receipt of funds. And so there will be a number of projects this winter into the spring. People will get back to work. But again, I have to tell you that in many instances, these are project specific. These are folks who are not working today. A lot of it is in construction. Tom Cochran, I think, may have invented the phrase that not everyone is going to jump on a backhoe. And so you've got dislocated workers from one segment of the population. But I can tell you, as sure as I'm sitting here, when I go back to Philadelphia tomorrow and pull up to the building, when I get out of my car, someone is going to walk up to me and say, Mayor, I need a job. They don't want to hear about the recession is over. They don't want to hear that manufacturing is up. They don't want to hear about credit markets. They're interested in the job market. And we don't have great answers for folks right here at the moment about, talk about shovel-ready projects. I want to talk about job-ready applicants and places to send someone. And it's a tough environment still right now, even with ARA.
Mayor Nichols, on the West Coast, what does it look like for you?
Well, Seattle has been awarded 60 or 70 million, and we have the same issue with the actual receipt of those dollars. Let me just talk about one of the programs that was in there that I think is worthy of not just being in the recovery package, but also being a long-term investment, an ongoing investment, and that is something called the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant.
Oh, yeah.
And that has allowed us to take the efforts that we started with the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement and bring them up to scale. So in Seattle, we have a goal of reducing our energy use in both residential and commercial buildings by 20%. And so we are doing a pilot project of 5,000 homes where we will buy down the cost of the energy audit from about $600 to $90 for the homeowner. And then we will have a fund, a revolving loan fund set up to invest in those energy conservation measures that are shown to be cost effective and can be paid for out of the savings. That is something that we could extend to every household, and particularly upon sale of those homes, require that and have that fund available to finance the improvements. So that piece has been very good. It provides about $10 per capita to each city to invest in those energy efficiency and conservation measures. But I guess one comment I would have, sort of a larger comment on the recovery package, and that is that, like the federal government, it is in these little tiny silos. And so I guess that proves how entrepreneurial you are to be able to find 60 or 70 different silos and be able to pull some money out of each. But I would suggest that in the 21st century, it might make sense for us to have a more strategic investment approach. That in the 1960s and 70s, when many of these programs began, the approach was the federal government said, show us how needy you are. And because we believe you are economic basket cases in America's cities. Well, today we are not. We are global competitors. In Seattle, we're globally competitive in aerospace, in information technology, and global health and biomedical research. So we know how to compete. And if the federal government looked at us as an investment opportunity and required a return on that investment, we would be more competitive. And I think that in the long run, our country would benefit from that kind of approach. The recovery needed to be done very quickly,
Right.
so it was done on all of the existing program areas. I think in the future, we ought to be a little bit more pinpoint in how we make those investments.
We're going to have time, I think, for one more question before we go to questions from the audience. And let me just sort of think forward another year, because we're saying tonight that we're at a kind of crossroads again as cities. And let's imagine for a moment that the recession is indeed over. Let's imagine for a moment that the stimulus money and the money that's in the queue to actually work for these programs that you've described so well in your cities, in fact, begins to flow, and indeed flows in this fiscal year in the way that you would hope that it would. Let's imagine both of those things, but let's now think about next summer in the cities of America. At that point, with the national economy recovered, what happens in terms of revenues at the state and local level? Traditionally, these have not moved in concert, and the question is really, what then can people expect to see happening in cities across this country, even with the good news playing out as perhaps we would most optimistically hope that it would? Mayor Nutter, and then why don't we just work through the panel?
Don't know a great deal about the economies in many of the other cities. What I know about my own is we're very fortunate to be, I guess, somewhat stabilized or buoyed by the fact that nearly 30% of our workforce is in education, medicine, hospitality. We have great medical centers, incredible number of schools and universities, 92 in our 5-county region. It's a big stabilizing force for us. And going back to what Mayor Nichols said, if there is, and I don't want to call it a second round, but if we were to do this again, investing in those institutions, they have projects, they have programs. I'm sure there's always something under construction here at Harvard, much like there is at Penn and Temple and Drexel and St. Joe's and the like. They are economic engines in and of themselves. And so investing in those areas would be critically important. I think we're still projected to probably continue to experience some amount of increased unemployment. Philly lagged going into the recession, and more than likely we're going to lag coming out. And so it will still be a major battle through 10 and 11 to conserve resources, be mindful of our cash position, while still trying to deliver high-quality services and stay focused on the primary things that I talked about from the time I was in council to a candidate to mayor before the great crash in September of '08, which is public safety, how we invest in education. I'd like to restart our wage and business tax reductions, which we had in place for 13 straight years until I stopped them in November last year while the slide was going on. So we want to try to get back to where we were while staying focused on the main issues and the vision that I laid out to Philadelphia in the first place, that we can be a safer city, a smarter city, a more sustainable city, and run an ethical government. Those were the fundamental principles, and we're talking to a new group of mayors. They're going to want to maintain what they promised to the public, while I can tell you it is just inconvenient not having any money. It's just really inconvenient.
Mayor Nichols?
Well, we actually are fairly well positioned to come out of this recession, and I think our city will recover relative to other cities fairly quickly. That isn't to say that we haven't had to make some very hard decisions, and these have been difficult times. But as mayor, I went through the recession of the post-9/11 recession, which hit Seattle economically harder than any other place, mainly because of Boeing. People weren't buying airplanes, so 30,000 people were laid off in commercial airplane manufacturing in our area. But I think that there are three kind of overarching challenges that we face that we will need to deal with long-term to be competitive. Transportation in our city. We've opened up our first light rail line, and I'm very proud of that. It only took 22 years of work on that to get there. And last fall, even with the credit crisis globally, our voters voted an $18 billion expansion of that system. So we're making good progress there. Affordable housing is a problem for us because we are a city that's growing. There's a lot of demand. It's hard to keep a supply of quality, affordable housing. And then education. Microsoft, great Seattle area company, is the strongest advocate for immigration reform there is, because that's where an awful lot of their talent comes from. That talent could just as easily be coming out of Seattle Public Schools, and it isn't. We have some good schools, we've got a couple of great schools, and we have some really awful schools. And if we're going to tackle climate change, we're going to need more people to live in our cities, in more proximity to where they work and go to school and play. We need to have great urban schools, and that will help us compete with these countries that have figured out that their road to prosperity comes through a strong education system. So if we get through this recession, great. Long term, I see some larger issues that we need to tackle.
As Mayor Kaut answers, if you'd please take your place by the microphones, because we'll go straight to questions from the audience. Mayor Kaut.
Thank you. Looking out to 2010, one of the things that we do and what was talked about here at the Institute is that we look at a 5-year budget and project out. So when we project it out for 2010, what we do know is that there's going to be a lag in our property taxes. So Mayor Nutter talked about it's difficult for us because our property taxes don't increase when you're seeing the economy bounce back. So it's a lag for us. So it's going to be difficult. But what we are looking at in the state of Minnesota, our unemployment isn't as bad as the nation. It's 7.8. In my city, it's 7.4. So one of the things that we also know that our shopping centers across the country are seeing a 20% vacancy rate. In my city, it's 6%. So we continue to work with our businesses and make sure that we can look to the future. But for the city, it's going to be a little difficult because of the lag in property taxes, and that's the only revenue stream that we have to run the city is property tax and our fees and charges. We get no government aid from the state, none, and we pay corporate and personal income tax and also sales tax into the state treasury. So all of that goes into the state treasury. So for my city, it's a lag. Because of decisions that we have made when I came into office, one of the things that we have in place is that we have a strong financial position. And so that has helped us to weather through this difficult economy. But one of the things that we continue to do is to look at our regional economy, because we know that as we look to the future, economic development has no boundaries, and we need to work together. So the things that are important to us as we continue to work on this for the future is jobs, housing, transportation, higher ed, and quality of life amenities. So those are the focus as we move forward.
There are 4 microphones here in the auditorium, 2 on the floor and 2 up in the upper balconies. Questions here at the Institute of Politics have 3 basic qualities to them. They are short, they contain 1 thought, and they always have a question mark at the end of them. If you would please identify yourself and your affiliation, and we'll start here.
Hi, my name is Nichols, and I'm a freshman at the college. My question is motivated by something that I'm learning in one of my sociology courses right now. One of the greatest challenges that Boston is facing relates to this idea of the city within the global context. And how do we, and one of the ideas that we're exploring is how do we attract this generation, so students like myself, to cities like Boston? And how do we make that happen? And specifically, I would love to hear which specific leadership abilities are needed on behalf of the mayors to make that happen.
Which specific?
Leadership abilities. What leadership
Didn't hear.
abilities are most necessary?
So we went through that conversation earlier this decade. Seattle is a western U.S. city, and in the western U.S. we have something of a dichotomy. We hate sprawl and we despise density. And so we worked hard to try and figure out understand that we couldn't have both, that we needed to choose what kind of a city we were going to build. And we had a long civic conversation, a couple of years long. We brought people in from all over the world to help us have that conversation. And what people told us was they wanted to have a very dynamic, vibrant city. They wanted it to be a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week city. They wanted a diversity of people and opportunities and activities. And then we started to talk about density as a tool to help to achieve that. So I think that the notion of Boston, Seattle, Philadelphia, the Twin Cities, you will see very strong arts and cultural life in those great metropolitan areas. You'll see a lot of different activities and a diversity in the population. And you'll see those cities over time becoming more dense, where people want to live in proximity to one another and have access to all of those wonderful things that you really can only get in a great city. And as I said before, I think affordable housing and great education are going to be an important part of that, and underlying it all are jobs.
One of the things that we started to work on and understanding if we're going to attract the younger generation and to our city to choose it as a place to live, that we had to have the kind of amenities that you're going to be interested in. One of those is that what kind of infrastructure for telecommunications, because you, the younger generation and some of the workforce today can work from any place. And I saw that around here today. You didn't have to be in an office. You were plugged in anywhere. So for us, it was important to make sure that we had fiber throughout the city. And we also wanted to make sure that in our new redevelopment areas, one of the criteria in our incentive for tax increment financing is that the developer would want to make sure that we put in fiber throughout that whole area, and so that it's there and available. We wanted to make sure that we have the arts, because that's what's going to attract you, because we understand that the younger generation are interested in great amenities in the city, that we have good trails, good parks, and we had the arts, so everything was inclusive. When we looked at housing and environments to live, I always say to people that you can live in Burnsville and choose any environment that you wish for. You want rural, you can choose rural in Burnsville. You want suburban, you can have that. You want urban, you can have that. You want lakeshore, you can have that. And if you want the river, we're beginning to redevelop that as well. So the thing is to make sure that we have the kind of amenities and infrastructure in place and the kinds of corporations that will bring you to live there and also have a job.
My fellow mayors have answered this one pretty comprehensively. For Philly, education we consider to be one of our primary businesses. We have 92 colleges and universities in the 5-county region. A part of the attraction for Philadelphia and the region is the quality of schools that we have. But I think you will now hear consistently across all three of us, art and culture, the creative economy are critically important to cities. It's also why I brought back, after it was closed in the previous administration, reopened the Office of Art and Culture and put on creative economy as a part of their activity. Fairmount Park, our waterfront development, we're finally moving along some projects on the waterfront. Greenworks Philadelphia is all about, I think, not only this generation, but even for older folks like myself, we like to recycle too. And so all of these kinds of issues, but ultimately, as was said earlier, it is about jobs. We can attract hundreds of thousands of young people to Philadelphia and the Philadelphia region, but when the 4 years or the 6 years or however long the educational experience is over, if you can't get a job, it really doesn't matter. And so part of the attraction and retention strategy is not only can you come to Philly and get a great education, but you can also get employment. And that's been a challenge for us.
Next question right over here.
My question is for Mayor Nutter. My name is Dewana Williams. I'm a mid-career MPA student here at the Kennedy School, and I'm a real estate developer from New York City. So prior to coming, I completed construction of a new condominium building in Northern Liberties this summer. I read yesterday in the Times that Philadelphia created a new program to retain homeowners in their homes, so that you now require a face-to-face meeting between lenders and borrowers.
Oh, you're talking about our mortgage foreclosure program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's been difficult for other cities to create such a program. I wanted to know, how did you do it, and what were some of the obstacles that you faced in getting that to happen, and if you think that there will be some tangible reductions in foreclosures with this new program.
No question. About 5,000 people have gone through the program, and nearly 4,000 have been served. We're probably up at about 1,800 people now. Their homes have actually been saved. It's a tremendous amount of cooperation among a variety of agencies. Some I directly have oversight, some I don't. The courts were critically important. The sheriff decided, upon the urging of the courts, to actually suspend last year sheriff sales for 4 months for residentially owner-occupied residential properties. The courts provided a tremendous amount of cooperation. We did not pass a piece of legislation. The banks are participating. Some of this is, sometimes they say timing is everything. This was coming at a time when banks were getting, we're on webcast. They were getting beat about the head. Let's leave it at that. And so just started cooperating. And so the deal is, until there is a conciliation conference, the sheriff's sale cannot go forward. We established a hotline. I raised money for that. We put out flyers. We have workers out on the street. If you see a SEPTA bus in Philly, there are probably still a few around. You'll see a big picture of me, encouraging people to call the hotline because we want people to stay in their homes. Mortgage foreclosure is a triple loser. Person loses their home. More than likely, they're going to end up in the city's social service system, and the bank ends up with a property. Banks don't want to own properties. They want to service mortgages. They have no interest in owning a property. So it's a real loser all around. Now, New York did establish the program. Mayor Bloomberg had me up a couple months ago, for New York's version of Philly's program, and a couple other cities are doing the same thing. I think front page story, either the Times or USA Today, one of them today, is anticipating a second round of massive foreclosures all across the United States of America. This issue is not going away anytime soon.
Up here.
Hello, my name is Adam Sapp. I'm at the Graduate School of Education, and I'm a citizen of Los Angeles, just since we're having a mayor's moment. And I was curious to know, in the beginning, I sensed a lot of optimism. You gave some great statistics with respect to crime and education, which suggests that, by and large, our cities are improving and they're getting better. But I wonder if you can't be sort of privately thinking about the fact that you may be facing an election season where citizens are going to be voting with the economic reality in front of them. And so I'm curious, how do you help your electorate contextualize this economic moment as you run for re-election?
Well, I actually ran into that in our primary, and the electorate is in a very bad mood. Thank you. And I think the economy and the insecurity that people feel because of their life savings, their retirement accounts, just taking a nosedive, is the bottom of it, and it then flares up in terms of local issues that might not otherwise have so much resonance, really having resonance. So I, as a victim of that, would suggest that is something that is very real, and that for the next, at least until the recession is not just appears to be over, but people feel that it's over, I think we'll see a lot of change.
There could not be a tougher environment for incumbent mayors, or any elected official for that matter, but especially executives, mayors and governors. I don't want to get into all the particulars of what happened in New Jersey, but you saw what happened in New Jersey. Mayor Bloomberg, great mayor, great leader, spent over $100 million, 51%, but actually has higher personal favorables. And so, I mean, part of the story here is I didn't create or dish out any derivatives. I didn't lend anyone any money.
Yeah.
I had absolutely nothing to do with the international economic financial meltdown, nothing. I fill potholes, pick up trash, and put police officers out on the street and try to run the city. And one day in the summer of 2008, my finance director and the chief of staff came in and said, we have a problem. We didn't know what it was, we didn't know what was going on, and eventually we all kind of found out. Well, folks are kind of upset. Somehow the rest of us for what's going on. They've lost a job, friend lost a job, company shut down, furloughs, healthcare gone, pensions gone, and again, don't really understand what are you folks doing. And so they take it out on elected officials, no matter what you do. So, I mean, show me someone who's never upset anybody, I'll show you someone who's never tried to do anything. It's tough.
And mayors are on the front line.
Right.
They see us every day
Right.
in grocery stores, at church, at coffee shops, walking down. So when people are unhappy, we are the symbol or the face of anything that's wrong.
Right here.
My name is
It's really
Liz.
got to make these folks really happy.
It's a little squirming in the front row.
Maybe get a recount. Or
But-
maybe I don't want this job.
My name is Liz Cohen. I am an urban historian and the chair of the history department here at Harvard. I'd like to ask you more about economic development. You've all mentioned the desirability, if not the necessity, of corporate investment, economic development. And yet, we also know that it's a slippery slope. And I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about the trade-offs involved, how one attracts that, how a city attracts that economic investment while trying to ensure that the benefits are distributed as widely as possible in the city. Just a few weeks ago, there was an article about Pfizer leaving New London after all that has gone on in that city to make accommodations to that corporation. And so I wonder, as you have worked with this problem, what insights you have about how cities can both attract it and protect themselves and make sure they get the full benefits.
That's a great question. And I'll give you my own take on that. For Seattle, the number one economic asset we have is the University of Washington. And when I became mayor, it fascinated me to discover that the relationship between the university and the city was much like the relationship between the U.S. and the USSR in 1950. The city had a policy of containment. And yet it is the number one public research university in America. They bring in $1.4 billion a year in research grants. And we were forcing them to turn down grants because they couldn't expand. And we literally had a law that said they couldn't lease more than 500,000 square feet off their campus. So the neighborhood in which the university was located, the university district, was suffering and was dying on the vine. And yet it had this huge economic engine available right next door. So we've changed that to a policy of engagement. We want to know what is going on in that research and what does it tell us about our future economy, and then how can we tap into that and attract great companies that then will be able to turn some of that research into products that cure disease or what have you. And so fundamentally that has been my economic development policy. And we have a very innovative and creative business community, from Boeing and their role in aerospace, Microsoft, their role in IT, Starbucks and their ability to figure out how to charge $3 for a 50-cent cup of coffee, probably the most creative act of all. We have a very creative and innovative business community, and a lot of that stems from the presence of the university and the talent and research that goes on there. So that to me is the strongest base. Whatever I can do to get more funding for the university, whatever I can do to allow them to thrive will help my city thrive.
One of the things that we do in my city of Burnsville, Minnesota, is that we have a close relationship with our CEOs and presidents of our corporations, and I convene a CEO roundtable so that I have a close relationship with them and to continue to understand what's going on in their companies, and then what's going on at the city, and how do we look at all of these things, so that, because we're all in it together. Then we also understand what their needs are. Infrastructure for telecommunications. Then we work with the utilities within our area. So those things that we can help to facilitate, we do. Those things that we can help with regard to tax increment financing to expand in our city and keep those jobs there, we have criteria that we put in place that they have to comply with and they do. Or if they need, in my city, we do not have a university. So what we did in the last 3 years was continue to look to bring a consortium of higher education to my city, and we did that with the private colleges because it was very difficult to do that with the state universities. So we have a consortium of about 4 different higher ed. So in those conversations, we understand the need that corporations need in terms of keeping their workforce trained for the 21st century jobs. The other is that we also help to facilitate for grant dollars for them for training. So if you're bringing in new jobs, and they would need to train them, how do we work with the Department of Employment and Economic Development at the state level to compete for some grant dollars to come back to my city? So it's that kind of relationship that we have with our corporations that helps them to continue to stay and make the choices of keeping the jobs in my city rather than outsourcing it out to somewhere else.
Mayor Nutter?
Lastly, I mean, I think it has to be a big part of anyone's economic development strategy. I mean, for the tightness of the credit markets and the fact that in many instances people aren't building anything right now, part of it, I'll use Mayor Nichols' word, part of it at this moment really has to be about engagement, just staying in touch. I mean, what many business leaders want to know today is, have you noticed that there's trouble out there and I'm under a significant amount of pressure? So I'm on regular calls and personal meetings with a lot of the business community in Philadelphia at their office. Not into this, you know, you have to come see me, and it's a whole bunch of nonsense. I come right down to your office, let your folks see I'm in your building, we care about what's going on here. We've dedicated a person in our Commerce Department, again, because we have such a presence of hospitals, medical institutions, colleges, and universities, one person totally dedicated to those sectors just to deal with their particular issues and challenges. Temple University just opened a new medical building. CHOP has buildings under construction. University of Pennsylvania is the largest non-government employer in the city of Philadelphia. We pay attention to these sectors because they're growing and thriving on their own to some extent anyway. So we have to pay attention to what's going on in that sector. But a lot of it is just staying on the phone, staying in person, staying in touch with what are your needs, what are your concerns. Well, we'd like to grow. We're not going to do it now because we need to hold back for a second. Let us know when you're ready. We'll make sure you get through the process as quickly as possible.
Right over here.
Good evening. My name is Jared Lodeholt, and I'm an MPA here at the Kennedy School. And Mayor Nutter, you spoke of your foreclosure, the diversion program in the city, but for all of you, for houses that are already abandoned, I guess what are you all doing to kind of transform your abandoned property crisis into an opportunity for expanding affordable housing or green space for that matter?
Well, you've got the NSP program, Neighborhood Stabilization Program, that came out, I think, slightly before ARA dollars. We're using that program, NSP 1 and 2, to go after those already foreclosed properties. We're actually trying to convince the feds to change a little bit of that policy because, that's on the back end. That's after the person's already lost the house. We'd like to shift more of those dollars to the front end to be on the prevention side, but for the moment, those were the guidelines that were written, at least for NSP 1. And so we're actively now buying those properties with Neighborhood Stabilization Program dollars, turning them over to developers. They make a little bit of money. House goes back out on the market, fully fixed up, renovated, and a new homeowner in that particular property. We need more of those dollars available, especially to deal with this second wave.
Foreclosure, frankly, hasn't been a huge issue in our city. We've been very lucky. We didn't have the same bubble that much of the Southwest did and Florida did. And so our work has been preventative. We've invested in our Urban League and some other organizations to set up counseling so that people who are getting behind on their loans have a place to go. What happens is somebody gets behind, they start getting notes from the lender, and they shut down. They don't answer the phone, they don't look at their mail, and what started as a relatively small problem then grows. And so we've been looking at trying to prevent our foreclosure rate from increasing. and by doing some outreach and some preventative measures. We have taken one advantage, and it isn't specifically foreclosure, but we've had a lot of development projects that sort of stopped in their tracks. Yeah. And we, every 7 years, have passed a housing levy for low-income housing. And so this year we passed it, and in fact passed it with over 60% yes vote. And we included in there some money that we called the Vulture Fund, so that we could go out on some of those projects that were ready, shovel-ready, and buy those plans and those permits from the developer, do it through a nonprofit housing developer for low-income housing.
Good idea.
Right up here.
Thank you. James Beverly, mid-career at the Kennedy School. The question I have has to do with economic clusters, so that how potentially your city views itself in the region as the hub for developing economic clusters. Yeah. How do you go about establishing that? And then is the high-speed rail going to be a part of that calculus?
In our region, and I think more and more in regions, we don't look to attract companies from other parts of our metropolitan area into the city. If they want to come and there's a competitive advantage for them, we welcome them. But we don't, that's not where our focus is. We figure that our competition is not Tacoma to the south or Bellevue to the east or Everett to the north. We figure our competition are cities like Barcelona and Sydney and the Kansai region in Japan. Those are our competitors. And so to the extent that we can build a sense of community as a metropolitan area and figure out what our clusters are and our strengths are as a region, we will be better able to compete globally. And so that's been our focus. And it actually gets a little sensitive. A company just recently decided to move to downtown Seattle, and we were very happy they did that, but we had to assure the city that it came from that we had not, we answered the phone when they called, but we had not poached them. We had not taken them.
No incentive.
Because we want to have that sense of a metropolitan unity that we are going to be together when we compete against the rest of the world.
As I said in one of my remarks, is that when we look at our region, there is no boundaries for economic development, and we need to understand that we're all working together to preserve the richness of the region. So one of the things that we do is we did an inventory about our strength to understand where our clusters are. Instead of looking at sectors, we know that in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, it's 11-county metro area, that our strength is in medical devices and service, and finance and distribution. And then we also understand that there is a huge cluster that feeds those strengths. And so we work to contain all of that and then to grow the jobs in those clusters and then attract more.
I took an idea from both mayors Daley and Hickenlooper, Chicago and Denver, respectively, and worked to create a metropolitan caucus. Much like Mayor Nichols mentioned, I, from day one, said we are not competing with Bucks, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery counties. It makes no sense for me to try to steal one of their businesses. They're going to steal one back. It's a zero-sum game, and everybody's just mad at each other. That we should, as a region, be competing with the rest of the country and the rest of the world. The 5 counties in southeastern Pennsylvania, we're very strong in life sciences, bio, pharmaceuticals, and increasingly energy. PECO, our local energy company, was one of only 6 companies to receive the full maximum grant out of the Department of Energy for smart grid technology and funding. The Navy Yard, which basically we own, is about the same size as Center City, Philadelphia, and which I refer to now as kind of Center City South. That's going to increasingly become an energy research campus where firms are looking to go there to engage in energy efficiency and sustainability practices. A lot of land down there. It's reclaiming some brownfield areas as well. And so we think that we compete very, very well and are strategically located in such a way that we have this little city just to the north of Philadelphia, kind of a suburb of Philadelphia, New York, and of course the governmental capital to the south, D.C. So in my conversations with the feds, I mean, what I say to them is, look, we're an incubator of innovation. We're the biggest city closest to Washington, D.C. If you guys want to try something, try it in this big city. We can handle pilot programs, take them to scale. If it works, wonderful. If it doesn't, I mean, it's not like we're going to collapse, and we'll figure out what changes we need to make it work. But those are our strengths in the Philly region.
We have time for two more questions, one at this microphone and one, well, perhaps there are two questions at this microphone over here. But the people that are standing now will ask their questions.
All right, well, good evening. My name is Dane Walling, newly elected mayor of Flint, Michigan. And what I'd like to know is your thoughts on the likelihood of a true transformed federal urban policy. Because it seems to me that if we're going to address the kind of sustainability challenges or certainly long-term economic development or equity issues, that there's going to have to be some fundamental reform of policies that have enabled the suburbanization, to some degree, segregation and isolation that exists in our metropolitan area. So will this president be able to pull that off?
Mayor Nutter.
I think he wants to. I mean, every conversation that I've had with President Obama's cabinet or White House staff indicates that they want to change the relationship with cities. I don't want to make too much of a political statement, but I mean, my first year in office was the last year of the last administration, and I mean, I'm a Democrat, and I mean, I had no expectations of that administration, and they met them. And so the current administration, I'm going to tell you right now, and our liaison, for the most part on a regular basis, is a guy by the name of David Agnew. You will not be able to escape the Obama administration. Someone from somewhere, some agency, some department is going to be in touch with you in your office or someone in your government on a pretty regular basis. There are multiple conference calls, meetings, conferences. You'll get invited, you know, a day or two notice, and then you know have to try to figure out how to change your schedule around. But I think that President Obama and his administration fully understands that if they're going to create, save, generate 3 to 4 million jobs, it's only going to happen in cities and metro areas. We are, the bulk of the country lives in a city or metro area. We're the predominant force in terms of GDP. It's where the action is. We have the scale to be able to do things, and I think they get that. But I think getting the rest of the federal government on the same page is a whole other story. I mean, they love passing stuff down in Washington, and then it ends up at our doorstep. You print the money, not us. So, you know, we have what we have, and there has to be a change in the relationship.
Quick.
Short, I think so. I agree with Mayor Nutter. I am hopeful. But the thing that worries me is that every little categorical program has a constituency, and that's why whatever member of Congress sponsored it. So you have to get over that sense of individual constituency satisfaction to a sense of general public benefit, and that's a pretty high hurdle.
Right here.
Hi, my name's Laura DeSaro. I'm a freshman here at Harvard, and I'm from Seattle.
All right.
And my question is, we've been talking a lot about the negative consequences of this economic downturn, but these times of economic downturn are also times of real change. And so I'm wondering how you see channeling this change into real opportunities for your cities.
Well, that's certainly an optimistic, it does. It probably hastens what would have happened anyway, which is that weak companies disappear and strong companies find a way to get stronger. And we've seen that. We had a Washington Mutual Bank was the sort of last large financial institution that we had, and they were one of the early victims. They fell, I think, 13 hours after Lehman Brothers or something like that. And so we're figuring out how, as a city, we're going to adjust to not having that presence and how we replace that. And so it makes you a little more innovative, a little more creative about how you deal with the resources that you do have.
And you're absolutely right. When there is a challenge, there is creativity that comes out of it. And when the paradigm shifts, all things return to zero, and creativity comes out of that. And so all of us are figuring out how do we work together, or how do we use the resources that we have now, but use it differently.
Certainly forces a different discussion. It's highlighted some problems that I think were already in existence, and it does give you a little more weight. For instance, in a discussion about what are you doing with regard to pension reform, healthcare benefits, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not talking about the national conversation about healthcare, just at a local level. These are the things that are eating our budgets alive. And so you can have a different discussion because you don't have any money. So one, it shortens a lot of conversations that people want to have with me. They ask me, will you do X? I say, no, I have no money. Any other questions? So, you know.
One more question here, I believe.
Okay, I don't.
No, you can bring it down. Help. We'll come down.
There you go.
Thank you. I'm Lily Clifton. I'm a freshman at Boston College. I may be the only person in here that doesn't go to Harvard.
It's okay,
but
you're safe.
I'm also from Seattle. But I was going to ask, how do you think the economic recession has affected all of your guys' I guess, priorities as mayor in the city, from maybe your response to climate change or your response to police relations with youth, or just housing in general? How has that caused a shift in those priorities that you may have had?
All right, last question.
Yeah. I think the one thing I would like to say to the soon-to-be, if they haven't been sworn in, new mayors, I mean, I kind of joked earlier about the inconvenience of not having any money. It is actually pretty serious. So you had all these ideas and plans and things you wanted to do, and you know 2 years, 4 years from now, somebody's going to ask you, well, what'd you do about all those things? You said this is what you're going to do. My only recommendation is, first and foremost, do the right thing for your city. Worry a little less about the politics and about re-election. The second is, even within that, you still have to work on what your priorities were. And so public safety was a priority. I've stayed focused on that, but I did have to cut their budget. Working with our education system has been a priority, but we weren't able to send as much money over as I wanted. And so even in that context, you still have to stay focused on the things that are important to your city. You might not be able to do as much as you wanted to do, and you still can't allow that to affect your ultimate judgment about what is in the best interest of your city first, and at least yourself second or third down the line. I've been able to do most of the things that I said I was going to do, not at the same speed, not at the same amount, not the same investment, but I think the citizens can at least figure out that the priorities are still the same. I just can't do it with the speed that I wanted to.
Mayor Nichols.
I just want to acknowledge these last two questions came from folks who were part of something I started as mayor, the Mayor's Youth Council. So it was something that we started to engage young people in civic life. So well done. Good to see you guys both. I would agree, it's focus on the priorities, on the key things that you need to do. In the case of Seattle, the two priorities in my budget that were untouchable were public safety and human services. People who need more than ever the resources of housing and food and medical care. And so during the tough time, you do what you have to do, and you do without some of the things you'd like to do.
Mayor Kaut.
We have all focused on our core services. And what we have done before was to partner to bring services like our 911 dispatching service. And we partnered with 13 other cities in the county and collapsed it into one. So those kinds of leveraging resources and leveraging our stakeholders, we're doing more and more of that so that we can continue to deliver excellent service but reduce costs to our citizens. So we're finding other ways to deliver service and make sure that we're keeping our eye on the core services. So public safety is always very important, but looking within public safety, we looked at 911 and saw a different way for us to do that. So accelerating stakeholder partnerships.
And what I heard here tonight reaffirms what I believe, and I think what many mayors present here believe. The most important things cities have ever done and will ever do are education and public safety and quality of life based. That's true in good times and in tough times, and will be true again in good times as well. Please join me in thanking these mayors and America's mayors here.